All right, so let's now talk about assignment 3. So there's a few steps you need to follow, so make sure you follow along so that you don't have any problems. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and I'm going to say I don't want to save, and I'm going to create a brand new project. So I'm going to start over. This is so that we have all the same settings. Okay, so these are the default settings. It's got set up just like the other one, 120 BPMs. The grid shows measures. In this case, we do want to show measures and beats. So if you were coming from the previous project, you didn't want to start over, you could always go here and change this to measures and beats instead of minutes and seconds. Now, so the very first step is that we will save this product. Now this is really important. It will remain important through this entire segment. Okay, this is a very common errors. A lot of the very common mistakes I see people make have to do with the way the project is set up. So before I do anything else, I will save this project as, okay, and I'm going to go to my desktop, and I have a folder called music folder that's empty, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to call it assignment 3, and I'm going to put my name. Okay, I guess I'm going to put my actual name, and it'd be nice if you format it like this so that I know who you are. Now this is very important. You want this box to be checked, create subdirectory for project, because otherwise what Reaper will do is it'll dump all your files into this folder, and that's okay, but if you start creating multiple projects, now you have all the project files all stuck in the same folder. Whereas if you have this box checked, every time you create a new project, it'll create a folder automatically for that specific project, so the things stay nice and neat. Now on top of that, and this is really important, check this box. It says copy all media into project directory. So this means that every file that you use, for example, if I use the scale file that we're going to be using, let's say you download the scale file and you put it in your downloads folder, and then you use it into your project, and then you submit your Reaper project, that scale file won't be there, because what Reaper does is it refers to the sound file that's on your hard drive. But when I download your Reaper project and I open it, Reaper will say, hey, whoever created this project used the sound file, but they didn't send it to you. It's not going to say it that way, but it'll say that it's missing. And so if you do this, what it'll do is it'll create a copy of that file, whatever files you use. And this particular assignment, it's not as important because it's just one file. But in future projects, you will have many sound files that you use, and constantly you have to go back to people and say, hey, listen, there's 20 files that you use and you didn't send them. So this will save all of us a lot of trouble, okay? So then we click on save. So that's our setup. Now we have a nice project name. Make sure you save your projects. Yes, always. Then next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the BPM. Why do I need to change the BPM? Because the scale that I recorded, I didn't record it, I just created it as a MIDI, but the scale that you will be opening is set up to be at 80, the beat that it follows is 80 BPMs. And if you don't do it that way, it won't align properly. So then you will have to stretch it. It'll be really confusing, okay? So let's make sure you have it at 80 BPM. Now the time signature, it's up to you. You could do 3/4, 4/4, 2/4. I would suggest something 4, because the notes of the scale move at the quarter note level, but hey, if you can figure out what you're going to do, get creative. Okay, then the next thing I will do, now that the project is correctly set up, is insert my scale again. So I'm going to go to media file, marimba scale, boom. Okay, so there's my scale. I'm going to move this to the beginning. Like I can just drag it to the beginning, or I can double click, and over here it says position, I can just type 0 and apply, and it'll push it right to the beginning. Okay. Now I'm going to make this a little bigger, like we've done before. And now what I'm going to do is, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to Splice, so this is a scale from the beginning to end. We've heard the scale already, okay? It's just a major scale. Now what I want you to do is I want you to use this scale. I want you to cut it up so that you have individual notes and you can use those notes to create a melody. So what you need to do is you need to splice at each beat. Now if you do this correctly, if you're following me, you're not gonna have any trouble because the beats already align with the scale. So as long as your snap is on, you can just click on the first beat, press S, and now you've spliced the first. Go to the second beat, press S, splice the second, etc., etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to do this for all the notes. Okay, and then there'll be a little bit of leftover, which I can just delete. So now I have a C, a D, an E, an F, a G, A, B, C. And now what I want you to do is I want you to label all of these notes. So you double click and you call this C4, and then you go to the next and you call this D4. I'm just going to label a few, and this is an E4. Okay, so let's just say you continue like this all the way to the end. Okay. Now, if you zoom in and you notice something weird, for example, this is a common problem. This is a very common problem. People have the wrong time signature, the wrong BPM, and the notes are just not aligned properly. So they splice, and then they have a splice in like a weird place before the beat. This is what it should look like. Your splice should be right before the attack, the beginning of the note. So where the waveform gets thicker, that's where you want it to be. If you have something that looks like this, let's say like this, that you're splicing over here, that's bad. Because now you're cutting off the note, your rhythm is going to be off. It's not going to work. Okay, so leave your snap on, make sure you're at 80 BPM. Okay, now you could still make small adjustments if you really want to. You know, let's say that you want a little bit more of the attack there. I don't know, like you really want it to be slightly, I don't know, for whatever reason. Then you could press, as I showed you in the previous video, press Option, and you could scoot the file. Because I spliced this, I can now move this around. Okay, you're not going to need to time stretch anything unless you've done something wrong. Okay. Now, once you're done with this, all you need to do is, so zoom in, check all the notes, make sure they all look nice and clean, label all the notes, and then you create a new track. So you just double click, and you call that track Melody. Okay, now in this track, you now take notes from here and you compose a melody. How do you take the notes? Well, you could select one, copy and paste, or you can actually press Command, and I guess that would be Control on a Mac, over a note, and you see there's a little plus sign that shows up. And now if you keep holding that down and you drag, it'll create a copy of it and it'll put it wherever you want. Okay? Now, I would suggest you leave the snap on. And what that will do is it'll give you a very clear kind of quarter note rhythm. If you don't want it, if you want something a little bit more complicated, you can certainly do that. So I'm going to show you, but I'd be happy if you just take the quarter notes and make a melody out of it. That's fine. Now, let's say you want to be a little more fancier. For example, let's say you want this note to be 2 beats. Well, how do you do that? I can't do it because it's only 1 beat. And if I stretch it, it's going to add another note, right? Because this is it's now adding the next note in the scale. So if this is a D, and if I do this, now it's adding an E over here. That's not what I want. But if you remember, if you press Option and then go to the edge, you can now stretch, you can time stretch it. So now I've made this D a half note effectively. Now, if you want to play this, make sure if I do play this now, it's going to play both at the same time, right? What you want is to only hear the melody. So you have to either mute this one or solo this one. So that's what those 2 buttons do. So M is for mute, so mute the track. And S is for solo. Solo seems like it doesn't make any sense, but if you have many tracks, let's say you have 20 tracks and you want to only hear the guitar, it's a lot faster to solo the guitar than to mute all the other tracks. So they're both useful in certain situations. Okay, so So that's, I'm going to solo this, okay? And so that's what I have now, okay? So I have a half note D, and then let's say I want C, so I'm going to do command, and I'm going to drag it down here. And then I'm going to put, I don't know, an E over here. Oh, hold on, sorry, I selected too many things. E, okay, so let's say what I have now. Okay, so you can do that. Now, what if you want a shorter note? What if you want an eighth note? Well, to do an eighth note, you now have to change the grid, because if you have snap on, the only way that you can reduce the size, it'll go basically either quarter note or nothing. It'll just skip all the way to here. So you need to change the size of the grid to eighth notes, and then now you're able to take the note and make it shorter. Now you could do it this way, or you could use the time stretch feature. And so the difference is, if I do it like this, the note will attack and then kind of be chopped off basically, but it's not necessarily abrupt because it's got the fade, so this is fine too. But if you want to preserve more of the contour of the kind of the envelope of the note, you can then do, you could use the time stretch and just go boom, make it smaller like that. Okay, so now let's say that I duplicate it, I do command D, now I have two, and then I do copy and paste this one over here. Okay, this is just random notes. Okay, so now I have a half note, a quarter note, two eighth notes, and another quarter note. So here goes. Okay, so it's got a different sound. It's a little drier because the decay is a lot faster since I compressed it. So it sounds a little bit unnatural to me. I would probably, for this particular case, I would probably go back to what it was before and actually just trim it down and see if we can hear the difference. Yeah, you see how it doesn't decay so quickly? The way that was decaying before was a little artificial for my taste. Okay, hopefully that difference was clear what I just did. I used a trim instead of kind of stretching the audio. Right, so that's pretty much it. Now let's say that it's time for you, that you're done, you've created an amazing melody that you're very happy with. If you want to, by the way, you want to get even fancier, create another track and do polyphony. Up to you, whatever you want. If you want to get even fancier, you can actually mess around with the volume of each note. Now I didn't really say this, but I'm going to. You see how you have the fade in and fade out? It's like this red line, right? And then there's this long line over here that actually represents the volume of the item. At this point, it's whatever the original is. But if you put your cursor in the middle, you're actually able to drag that down. So you can reduce the volume of that one item by however much you want. So you can reduce it a lot. You can actually increase it too. And so, you know, that could add a little bit of shape to that if you want to, okay? All right, so submitting your project. So once you're done, very important that you mute the scale or you solo your melody, and then you select your melody. So let's say this was my melody. You should do a longer one than this. This is too short, but let's just say that that was my melody. I create a time selection. How am I creating a time selection? So remember, the cursor changes shape depending on where you are. If I go right above the track, I now can get this like, I don't know what shape that would be, kind of like an I, capital I. And if I click and drag, I can now select a certain portion of the time, okay? Now we go to File, Render. So what is render? Render means you take combine all the sounds that you've edited and put in here, and you turn all of that into a single sound file. And there's a few settings here. We're going to leave the sampling rate alone. This is perfectly fine. You could put stereo if you want, or you can change it to mono. We're not really concerned with stereo or mono right this second. Mono just means it's one channel, stereo is two. And then you tell it where you want to put it. So you can browse for a directory. I'm going to put it in the same directory, which is my music folder. And I'm going to put it right outside here. I'm going to click on open, and then I'm going to render. Actually, I made a mistake, sorry. Here, oh boy, come on. Sorry, I X'd out of it. There. So the mistake I made is that over here where it says source, this is fine. Source is master mix. We'll explain this a little bit later, but basically that just means this is what the combination of everything. That's the master mix. Like imagine that you were mixing lots of things. There's really only one thing. There's not much of a mix. But here where it says entire project, so this is fine, but where it says entire project, it's now going to go all the way to the end until there's items, which is not what we want, because what it'll do is it'll create like a tail end that's empty. What we want to do is time selection, because that's the reason I made a selection, is so that I could only bounce or render the time selection. Okay, hope that makes sense. And then now I'm going to do render file. I'm going to overwrite it. And you get this really useful window. Now it's going to go through it. You didn't see it because it was in my other screen, but it just went through this. And it shows you what your sound file looks like. This is very helpful because there's a meter here. And if something is clipping, it'll tell you. When it's finished, if you see red here, it means you have too much, there's something is getting too loud. And you might not notice this. So you might have to go back and check your levels again, okay? So I'm going to go close. Okay, so now what do you need to submit? Here's what you need to submit. So I'm going to go back to my music folder, say I'm ready to submit my assignment on time. And music folder, where are you? I lost you, music folder. There you are. And okay, so I have my sound file. I want to submit this. I also want you to submit the Reaper file. So I might as well drag and drop this here. Okay, and okay, let's actually go back out and save this project. And now what I should have done now is, now that I have been using a sound file in here, it should have added it in here. There it is. Oh, it didn't add it. Why don't you add it? Okay, let me go back to, this is not crucial because I have that scale, but I'm going to do this again. Okay, so save project as, oh, that's interesting. Why did it do that? Well, let's make sure that it says copy all items, all media into project directory. Save. Yes, we can replace it. There it is. Yeah, this is what it should have done. It should have created my project, and then this is my sound file that I just rendered, and this is my scale. Okay. So good. So this is what you should see. You should see all 4 files. You should have the rendered file, the scale file. You should have your project file. So then you have these additional files that you don't actually need to submit, but the Reaper will create anyway. One is a backup file. So that's basically your project file as a backup in case something happens. So you don't need to submit that. And then there's a file called ReaPeaks. Now this is a very common problem, that people think that this is a sound file because they see the name as marimba scale.wave and they say, oh, this is a wave file. No, it's not. It's a ReaPeaks file. It's actually a tiny little image. It's what Reaper does to be able to display the sound file. It turns it into a little image. So this actually means nothing to, it means something to Reaper, but it's not useful. So when you need to submit your file, all you need to submit is your RPP file, and then any WAV or AIFF files that you've used or that you've created. So in this case, it would be 3. Now, if you don't submit the marimba scale, I can live with it because I have it. But just get into the habit of doing it. I would suggest that the way you submit it is you actually, rather than attaching individual files rather, is you compress this. So you take this, you compress it, and then you submit the zip file. And then all your files will be in there. That's going to make everyone's life much easier. Okay? Especially in later projects when you're going to have dozens of files. It's going to get really crazy. All right, so let me know if you have any questions.